Really excited today. This will be our first interview that we're including in this video series. So you'll notice on your screen, we've got Dustin Riechmann here. He's a partner at FireCreek Snacks, best beef jerky for sale online. So go out and get yourself some of that. How you doing, Lindsey?
Doing good. I'm really excited to have a guest. I'm really excited to switch it up. So just really cool to have you here, Dustin. Thanks for taking time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love working with you guys and can't wait to share some, hopefully, what will be very helpful marketing strategies.
Awesome. So yeah, just to give a little bit of context, I met Dustin a while ago. He was on a podcast, forget which podcast at this point. But yeah, he was on the podcast, and Dustin, I think we had just enough overlap in our backgrounds and just kind of some cool little synergies there. So I reached out on LinkedIn, and ultimately you got back to me, which was really cool. So started working together, and we've been kind of going back and forth, bouncing ideas off each other ever since. So the reason I invited Dustin on today is to talk about what he calls partnership marketing. I think of it as getting onto podcasts, but I know it's a lot broader than that. So yeah, Dustin, why don't you kind of take it away and introduce yourself, and then kind of how you got into FireCreek and using partnership marketing there.
Absolutely. Yeah, Andy, my quick backstory will probably help give people context into how I think and how I approach marketing. But I was an engineering consultant for many years. And so that's really my background, was a specialty in traffic engineering of all things. And then I built a brand called Engaged Marriage online as a side hustle and out of an outreach of marriage ministry my wife and I were doing. And so that was way back in 2009. And then I wrote a book and was speaking and really got into digital marketing in an effort to grow that brand. Ultimately left engineering, became a marketing consultant with all the stuff that I learned and all the inbound clients and things that I had been able to work with over those double duty years there towards the end of my engineering career. But one of my clients when I came out of engineering was a local butcher shop. And the third generation grandson of the founder was the current owner. Him and I hit it off, and he showed me this brand he had in his store. I actually found it. It's a whole nother story, and it's one I often tell on podcasts of how we really came together. But I'll spare you those details today, and we'll talk more strategy. But this is Ryan Hansen, and so he became my business partner ultimately with FireCreek Snacks. He asked me, "Hey, can you sell stuff online?" I said, "I can definitely sell stuff online. I've never sold a physical product. I'd never sold on Shopify, but I said, let's try it." And that was the leap I took with him. And basically, we worked together on a goodwill basis to see if it had legs, and it did. And ultimately, we ended up traveling to a dozen trade shows together the first year in business, and had a lot of crazy adventures along the way. But of course, grew that e-com business to seven figures before we ever spent $1 on paid ads, which is pretty contrarian, pretty unusual in the e-com space. And I'm not saying that to say don't do paid ads. You should definitely work with PPC pit bulls and do that. But I viewed it as, we're trying to prove something before we went and spent money. And also, it just fits my mojo, right? Like, I love relationships. I love telling the story of the brand. And it was really through those efforts that I came up with what I now call partnership marketing as a system. And I teach it to other people at a company called Simple Success Coaching. So I kind of wear two hats. I'm basically the CMO of FireCreek as the partner in that business. And then with Simple Success Coaching, I help other brands, a lot of e-com brands, but also, agencies and coaches and consultants grow their businesses through partnership marketing as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's, a lot of how I started working with you, kind of working together, learning a little bit more about, kind of leveraging, getting onto podcasts and trying to build partnerships in that way.
Yeah.
Something I'm really interested to kind of hear your take on, and maybe it's kind of introductory here. I've always thought of that as a really good way to build a B2B business. So, how we get on and how we hear, how we, get onto podcasts, for instance, in my case, people who are interested in marketing and looking for different ways to market their business. Hopefully they would, hear me and eventually want to, ultimately engage in my services. But I think what's really cool and something that I really was impressed with when I first heard you talking about it was how you use that same strategy to go ahead and sell a physical product and sell snack sticks. So
right.
Can you talk a little bit about what makes that different and some of the strategies around that?
Absolutely. So you're right. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing when I started. The impetus behind this whole thing and how I started to learn it was COVID. We had a really strong brick and mortar presence. We had a really strong local Walmart presence. we were, if we were rolling, we had a lot of momentum in March 2020, and then all the doors shut down in my home state of Illinois, and everything became bleak very quickly. And so I said, what can I do? And so I reached out to an acquaintance, Nick Loper. I don't know if that was a show you heard me on, but I've been on like 50 now. But my very first one was Side Hustle Nation. And I was just like, hey, I have a lot of side hustles I've done. I've got a lot of lessons. My kids have businesses. I'd love to just come on and share that. And the topic ended up focusing a lot on FireCreek and how this partnership came about and how we were growing it, kind of hand-to-hand combat style and not with paid ads. And it resonated. So I gave a coupon code at the end of the show. I'm like, I guess, who knows? And I made several $1,000s worth of sales of meat sticks, right? So you're absolutely right. I listen to tons of podcasts. I've built my entire coaching business being on podcasts, and that is the intuitive way that people think like, well, yeah, if you have if you're selling several $1,000s a month in services, you only need one client. It makes the podcast worthwhile, right? But what if you're selling a $2 meat stick, right? Like a craft jerky is basically what we have, a craft brand. Does that really make sense to, like, who's going to buy that? Especially if you're getting on a show and you're talking about business. Like a lot of the shows I've been on I've been on like the official Shopify podcast. I've been on Bigger Pockets, which is more of a real estate oriented show. But I'm telling the authentic founder story of our brand, sometimes from my perspective solely, like how I got into it and how this business partnership works and how the marketing works. Sometimes more from Ryan's perspective of, it's a very compelling story. He's a third generation guy. This business has been around for 60 years. He literally built a hickory smokehouse in the back of his butcher shop and experimented until he came up with some great products. And he realized at some point he had one of his twin sons has a food allergy. And so he's like, I've got to be able to make this cleaner than all the stuff that's on the shelf without losing the flavor. And so he is the product genius and still is. But there's a great story there. It's very compelling. So I could be on a show and talking about food allergies, gluten-free, and telling I have 2 gluten-free daughters. So you got to find the nuance to hook into to make it relevant to an audience. And so, but what I discovered was really interesting is that even if I'm talking about Shopify conversion rates and landing pages, there's still some percentage of that audience who connects with me more than anything, connects with the story, and it's like, you know what, I want to support this person. And they'll go buy your stuff. So what I've come to realize in the past year and working with a lot of clients and doing more of this B2B stuff is like, I view this as like a 3-layered cake. And so if you want me to, we can kind of open that up, because I think that'll give people a lot of perspective on where does e-com fit into these 3 layers versus maybe B2B versus services, because all 3 are applicable to any business, but some are definitely going to emphasize one over the other.
I love it. Yeah. Leave it to the coach to have the system laid out here. Yeah.
3 layers.
Break it down.
Right, so layer 1 is the obvious one. And that's exactly what you said, Andy. It's like, I get on a show, I get exposure, I sell some stuff. Maybe if people download a lead magnet, maybe they're buying something with a coupon code, maybe they're, contacting me for a consulting call. But that's layer 1. It's this direct one to many. There's people out in the ether listening to this video, they're listening to podcasts, whatever. And some of them are going to raise their hand because they're compelled by what I say and they want to come into my world. And that's the only reason I ever did podcasts. And that's good. And if you can go make a couple $100, a couple $1,000, that's kind of my range. If I'm selling snack sticks, a small podcast, I might sell a few hundred. A large podcast, I might sell, approaching 5 figures I've had on 1 or 2 shows. And that's good. And that pays for your time and it's worthwhile. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. So that's layer 1 though. So think of layer 2. This is what I discovered only after doing 5 or 10 shows, is what I call the network effect. And that's this idea that when you do this consistently, that those audiences are still out there, but what you start to have is inbound relationships. So this is a great example. Andy heard me on a show. He was compelled enough by what I said and thought there was something we had in common. He reached out on LinkedIn. We've had a relationship for, well over a year now, right? And we've helped each other out a lot. We've made referrals to each other. And this is one of literally several hundred relationships that I've formed from being out there on podcasts. So partnerships can be broader, and we'll talk about other forms. But for the audience listening, just think of podcasts. It's a really simple example of a partnership. But in that podcast world, yes, there's the direct one-to-many audience. Layer 2, though, is this network effect. I've had Zoom calls with the meat snacks buyer at Walmart. I've had marketing interns begging us to work for our company. We've had lots of brand partnerships. We've had influencers reach out. And it's just like you're planting all these seeds by this activity. And this, if you do this consistently, like as a system, and you just don't know when those seeds are going to sprout. So we'll come back after I get through the 3 layers. I'd love to tell you and your audience about something that happened with our brand with a company called Snack Nation. And it's a great example of this network effect. But that's layer 2. Layer 3, and Andy, I don't think this is something that you and I have talked that much about. Layer 3 is what I would call high ticket sales. Okay, so this is probably the one that most of the people listening, if they're an e-com brand, are like, yeah, that's the one that doesn't apply. Like, that's the coach, that's the consultant, the people who do those things, they have that high ticket offer. But I would challenge that, and I would say, think about for your brand, what is a high ticket offer for your brand, right? The high ticket offer doesn't mean you have to sell 10,000 snack sticks. It could be a targeted relationship that you really want. So think about the buyer at a really key grocery store, in my case, or a really influential person, like a big influencer who would love to get your product in their hands and have them endorse it. How do you reach them, right? It could be a major distributor. So think about it that way, not just like you're selling services, but your product, there's some tie into a high ticket experience for your kind of business, including e-com. And the way that layer 3 works, and again, this is something I've really been working with clients on in the past year and dialing it in for myself and my clients, is think of it as choosing that high ticket target. And I don't mean target in a negative way, but this relationship you really want, you're choosing it in advance, and then you're building up to that relationship. And in this case, through podcast guesting. So if I knew, man, this Andy guy, if I could get him to endorse FireCreek snacks, it would be killer. He doesn't know me from Adam though. And I go search though, and I find out Andy's been on 5 shows, and I feel like one of those is very approachable for me. I'm going to go get on the show to open up the client list from that show, or the past guest list from that show, because all those people are potential targets for me. And now I have a warm relationship in some way. So, and that's a very minute example if I'm actually choosing Andy. The way this typically would work though is like, let's say for an e-com brand, they interview a lot of brands that are in your niche that you would love to collaborate with. Like, they're all a little different than yours, but like, that you could have great Instagram giveaways or brand collaborations. You can actually sell each other stuff on your Shopify store. So, but you've got this this target niche of people that you'd love to reach, but you don't have any relationship with any of them. Well, if you get on a show and then you look at the past guest list of that show, you can go through and screen, and every past guest is a potential relationship for a high ticket relationship, a high ticket sale, a high ticket brand collaboration, etc. And the cool part is evergreen, because every future guest is also a warm relationship. Because if I've been on that show, I can immediately say, Andy, I noticed you were on Joe's show. I was actually just on there recently talking about my brand. Keep up the good work. And then if they respond, you get into a conversation, and eventually, you could make your pitch for whatever you're trying to do with a high ticket sale. Like for me, if with coaching, a more direct example, if I like to work with e-commerce agencies, I'm going to get on shows that have a lot of e-commerce agency leads on there talking about strategy, so that I can then have a warm relationship and go open up dialogue with them and see if I can help them with their marketing. Right. So, and that's the guest list approach. The other thing is like the host themselves. Sometimes like that host would be a great influencer for my brand. What better way to have a relationship with that host than to get on there and spend 45 minutes talking about your brand and having them just say, this is the greatest brand. And then when you're getting ready to hang up after the recording stops, you say, I'd love to send you samples. I'd love to have a follow-up discussion to see if there's some way we could work together. Like, think about the relationship that you form with a host just from that one interview. And it's all, in a giving way. It's all this win-win-win thing that I talk so much about. It's a win for me as the brand owner, because I get exposure and a potential relationship. It's a win for the host because they get great content, and that's ultimately what drives their podcast. And that's great for their audience. It's a win for them because they're hopefully learning something or finding out a story or finding out a brand that they really are going to grow to love. So that's my 3-layered cake. I went a little deep on the 3rd layer because I think it's the one that would be most misunderstood by e-commerce brands. It's not intuitive, but it's there if someone wants to think that way and be strategic about it.
I love that. Yeah. I love the kind of creative, think outside the box, hey, it's getting on podcasts and ultimately getting a coupon code out there to make a sale, but there's so many other things, many other things you can do with that. So really cool. That's something I really appreciate about you, Dustin, is the ability to kind of see opportunities there that maybe you wouldn't necessarily always think of.
Yeah. And I think that comes from, I've been involved in, I don't know, of my own, probably 10 companies, but with clients, dozens and dozens of companies of all different industries and types and sizes. And so that gives me kind of a unique ability, honestly. When I have a conversation with someone, I can see things outside of what they can see because I've just got a unique perspective, right? So I can see how this layer 3 can work for an e-com brand, whereas most e-com brands and even most e-com agencies would never think about taking a high ticket sales approach for an e-com brand, but it's there. And when you're doing high ticket sales, you need a pipeline, and the pipeline can definitely be fed through this podcast strategy when you think about it that way.
Can I roll us back a little bit? I want to ask about for the e-com owner who is terrified of this or could never think that they could do it. Have you run into people like that before? What kind of advice would you give like a business owner who's like, I don't think I could do that?
Yeah, I mean, for one, you don't have to do that, right? There's lots of other forms of partnerships, but if you do want to do it, but you're just fearful and you just don't have experience, then, I mean, honestly, one thing you can do is get a coach. I mean, that's kind of the first step that we work with people. Even if they've been on a bunch of podcasts and they're good at it, we really help them dial in the message that they want to deliver and what are the outcomes they're wanting to get, because it might very well change what they're talking about on the show. But yeah, for someone who's hesitant, some really quick tips is almost every interview, and you can choose which shows you're pitching, right? But almost every interview is just a casual interview for the most part. They're almost all edited. So if you screw up, you can be like, I'm sorry, I screwed up, or my mind went blank, and Andy's worked with me enough to know, like, we've got tools to like really set you up to have confidence on the show. But for someone who's thinking about this, the 2 quick tips. One is practice your introduction. Like, you can do it in your bathroom mirror. It doesn't matter. But, every show is going to be like, hey, Dustin, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your background, right? And if you can roll that off your tongue really easily, it makes you feel so much more confident versus like if you're stumbling over your words and it feels awkward and you feel sweaty or so just knowing your introduction and be able to say a 30-second introduction impromptu, anyone can do that with a little practice. And then the other side of that's the call to action. I think one of the things people mess up a lot on interviews, the opportunities they don't have a strong call to action at the end. They don't tell people what to do next. So it's very much a wasted opportunity. You've built rapport for 30, 45 minutes with an audience. They want to know what to do next. And if you don't have that crisp and clear, it can fall flat and you'll just kind of lose an opportunity. So I don't know if that answers your question, but preparation, I guess, is the key. Listen to a few of the episodes, especially the beginning of them and the end. Have that introduction dialed in. I have something I call the magic Post-it note. So basically every interview I do, I'll have a Post-it note. It's a lot like this. And it's basically got the host name. It's got the general topic I'm talking about. It's got like some key stories that I want to make sure to remember to interject in, depending on what outcome I'm trying to produce. It's got the call to action, like what link I want to talk about at the end. And if they do like a lightning round, it's got my answers to that. And it's just real easy. That way, it's my security blanket. Honestly, it sits right on my computer. So I'm doing a podcast. I can easily look down and be like, oh crap, I forgot the host name. Like, this is awkward. They just said my name. What's theirs? Or like, oh, is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Dustin? I can look down and be like, oh, we didn't talk about point 3, which is one of my bread and butter things I want to talk about. So that preparation is really key. And if you can work with a coach, even for like one session, they can like walk you through this. So you kind of feel empowered, I think, by the end.
Yeah, that did answer my question. And I'm just thinking of a lot of e-commerce business owners who are thinking, I really only work with my customers through a computer. So like, what would be the point, or why would I want to build that kind of network? And especially because you have such a background having gone to trade shows and just talking to people, I'm sure there's plenty of e-commerce business owners out there that are like, I don't talk to people often. I think this would be like really challenging.
And I'm like the world's biggest introvert. Like, I hate going to parties. This trade shows, I'm so drained by the end of the day, like standing toe to toe and talking to people and having them sample and like get honest feedback. And I don't do it anymore. But for that first year, it was so vital to find out what's the brand message that resonates. What do people actually care about? What objections do I hear that they don't want to sample? And then how do I overcome those objections? And like all that stuff ends up on my packaging, and all that stuff ends up on our landing pages. So it's really important, whether it's that face-to-face in person, but the same process, on a podcast, you're going to get asked questions that are going to challenge the way you think. People are going to be like, why did you name it that? It seems like it should be named this, or, you spent the whole interview. You didn't tell me how much protein's in it. My audience is keto. Oh yeah. So it just makes you a better brand owner and a better advocate for your brand when you're forced to talk about yourself. And I know that's the thing with e-commerce people. So many are drawn to it because they can just like hide behind a computer and hopefully get a positive ROAS and and go retire on the beach. And maybe that works occasionally, but I found it's been a lot more fulfilling and a lot more lucrative to also form relationships. Like do that stuff, but like, get some partnerships going and get some exposure for your brand in ways that, and the beautiful part in e-commerce in particular, most brands aren't doing it. So you're going to be a step ahead of your competition if you're just willing to get out and talk for 30 minutes about your brand.
Dustin, one of the simple things that I loved, I think you had mentioned and really was impactful for me too, was really focus in on the podcast you want to target. Look at their Apple, the number of reviews on Apple Podcasts, and you'll see, some of the biggest ones, maybe you're looking at like 1,000 reviews or 2,000-3,000 reviews. And obviously, like you mentioned, those are the ones that are going to get you a ton more sales. But hey, if you're starting out and you're a little bit uncomfortable, you haven't done this before, start with the ones that have like 5 reviews or have 10 total episodes. And I feel like it just takes a lot of that pressure off, even from the pitching perspective, that like it doesn't feel like everything has to be perfect because they're new and they're just figuring it out too. So it's a nice way to kind of get your sea legs under you. A few, just get a couple in, even if they're not the most lucrative things. It's almost like practicing a few times before you.
That's an excellent point. And also, I mean, if you have a peer, do a mock interview, right? Like, just get on a Zoom call and say, interview me, Andy, and then, and see how prepared you feel at that point before you even get on a show. But you're absolutely right. I always advocate, if you've never done this, like the first 3 shows should be, I don't mean, this sounds disrespectful. I don't mean throw away, because you're still going to have a great relationship with the host, but throw away in the sense that you're not tied at all to the outcomes. Like you don't expect anything to come from this because it takes all the pressure off the interview that way. And those are the small shows, like you said.
Definitely. Hey, so I know we're coming up against our time here, so I want to be respectful and cognizant of your time. But one story, I love the Snack Nation story. I know you referenced it earlier. Can you just give us a quick tell the audience about that?
Yeah, and I'll be quick. But so same time COVID, 2020 shutdowns. This brand Snack Nation, people may be familiar, but their whole model was basically like Google, Facebook, Apple, big companies buy these better for you snacks, and they would ship them to their break rooms to energize as an employee benefit. Well, all these places shut down and everyone's working from home. So they were pivoting their whole business model to ship direct to home for these employees. And I just came across something on LinkedIn that I'd never even heard of Snack Nation. And this guy is like kind of complaining, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to change our whole business? So I just sent him a message. It was like, hey man, sorry, I'm dealing with some similar things with our business. I'd love to send you some snacks. I didn't know who he was really. I always kind of lead with samples because we have really good products, so it kind of opens doors. And he said, okay. So like a week later, he sends me back. He says, this is literally the best teriyaki stick I've ever eaten. My whole job is buying meat snacks for this company, Snack Nation. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. But they only worked with big companies, but he was gracious enough from that to do a small placement for us. I think it was like 7,500 snack sticks. So it was a full donation. Like we just had to donate it, but they put us in some of their subscription boxes, and the feedback was positive. So I leveraged that and I said, hey, great. I'd love to tell our story. I know we're a small brand, smaller than you usually have in your podcast, but the product's good. You liked our story. So he introduced me to, they have their own podcast called Brand Builder. So Ryan, my partner, and I both got on there and did a really, really good interview deep into the history of the brand. And that was it. Or so I thought. That was late 2020 when that podcast came out. And then about 3 months ago, as we're sitting here, so in like late January 2022, so nearly a year and a half later, I get this email, and it's from Sharon at Karoo, right? I'm like, what the heck is this? So Karoo is like the new brand version of Snack Nation. They rebranded. And then Sharon was this guy's replacement. So I had never heard from the guy again that I interacted with. And she says, hey, I've been researching our customer reviews in my category. I'm new to the job. And I also have been listening to the podcast interviews for the people in this category. I love your story. The reviews were great. What's your production capacity? And I'm like, it's an odd question. So I told her it's pretty high, and she's like, cool. Well, if it's okay with you, I want to start in Q2. And for the rest of the year, I want to place cumulative PO for 600,000 snack sticks. So our biggest customer to date, and really cool to work with. And keep in mind, this is not just, and these are not donations, right? They're paying us. It's profitable, and it's putting we always joke that we put our meat in your mouth. Like that's how we convert our customers, right? It's getting our meat in the mouths of like all these like ideal customers, these kind of affluent techie people who work for these companies. So that's well underway. We're in our 3rd PO in that series. But it was a simple LinkedIn message. It was a simple podcast interview. I planted seeds, And then 18 months later, what pops up is like our biggest customer ever and 600,000 snack sticks in this calendar year. So pretty crazy. So yeah, thanks for letting me tell that story. And so any e-commerce people out there, like, is this worth it? Again, you may not feel like it's worth it for the very first interview or even the first 10, like the direct sales maybe feel slow, but you don't know who's listening. Ultimately, this is a long tail exercise. Like these podcasts live forever. You just never know. And so I've got lots of stories like that of cool opportunities that have come up just because I went out and told my story some Thursday afternoon on a random podcast and did not have any idea who might be listening, 18 months later in this case.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool, kind of the serendipitous outcomes that can come about that you would never even necessarily think about. So cool. Well, before we jump into what's good, do you want to take a quick second and give your, I promise I give you a little bit of time to give your shameless plug for coaching here. Let's hear it.
Absolutely. Well, obviously FireCreek snacks, if someone's actually into craft snack sticks, they're only sold in the US at this point, but anyone listening is very welcome to head over to firecreeksnacks.com for that. But yeah, my main passion, the thing I like to talk about a lot these days is partnership marketing, this same strategy we've been talking about today. So if anyone wants to talk about that for their brand specifically, I offer a free consultation. So basically we'll spend some time and I'll give you a lot of actionable advice that you can go do, or you can hire me to help you with it. That's basically my whole pitch, is I lead with complete value. And then it's totally optional if you hire me. Fortunately, most people do because they see the value in it and they want to get fast results. But that's at simplesuccesscoaching.com. So right there on the homepage, you'll see a button to apply for a free strategy call. So love to talk to any brand owners or agency owners or coaches or consultants, kind of anyone in those worlds, in the e-com sphere specifically, based on my, obviously my background with FireCreek. Those are the people I really connect with.
Awesome. Cool. Well, hopefully everybody will go check it out. Like I said, I've been working with Dustin and can definitely highly recommend.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Awesome. All right. So let's get into what's good here. So Dustin, this is our quick segment. It can be anything going on in your life, personal, professional. It could be a media recommendation, whatever you got. I know I mentioned this to you before we're getting ready. Are you ready with what's good, or do we want to kick it to Lindsey first here?
I can go.
Yeah, take it away.
Lots of good things. I'm always thinking about what I'm grateful for. But this week in particular, I live in the St. Louis area. You can see my Cardinals shirt. I'm going to a Cardinals game tonight for my son's high school. But last night I was at the Blues hockey game, and they lost. That was the bad part. But the good part, it was a really good game, really intense. And my son and I, it was our first playoff hockey game ever. We got some cool seats down by the glass. And little did I know, I ended up sitting by 5 of the top Blues players' wives and spent the game talking to them. So that was quite an experience last night. So I'm very thankful that you probably heard my voice crack. I couldn't speak this morning, so I'm glad I got it back by the time we did our interview.
That's awesome. Cool. Lindsey, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I'm going to debut something we've never done before, which is a recommended candy.
Ooh,
nice.
I follow a lot of like junk food, snacky type people on Instagram who are always looking for the next big candy and unveiling what big brands are doing currently. And I saw that M&Ms are doing a crispy cookie M&M, and I will tell you, it was hard to find, but we found it and now I can't stop eating it. So if you like a nice crunch with your M&M, and if you're like me and you don't like the peanut version, which I know probably so many people are like, boo, but I don't like them. So if you like the crispy cookie texture, I highly recommend. That's what I've been downing quite a bit this week.
Is that like, what kind of cookie is it like? Is it like a homemade cookie that's crispy, or is this like one of those like sugar wafer type cookies?
Oh, that's a really good question. But have you ever had their ice cream sandwiches where it's a sugar cookie with the M&Ms in it and then like the vanilla ice cream in between the two cookies?
Yeah. Yep.
It's like that if it was dried to give it that crunchy texture, and which I love. I love a good sugar cookie. So it's kind of like that.
Awesome. That sounds great. Cool. From my side, this week we had my son's second birthday. So yeah, we're here in the new house. Had ended up being like 30 people over. We were not expecting it to be so big, but yeah, ended up just a great time celebrating his birthday. Yeah, I don't know if the best part of the good thing here is hosting and having a bunch of great people around celebrating him, or just the fact that he's growing up so quick and kind of watching him turn 2 was really, really cool. So just a great weekend surrounded by a lot of friends and family.
That's awesome.
Did y'all have a theme?
Yeah, it was construction. So we had little construction hats, had a bunch of 2 and 3-year-olds running around the house with construction hats on and banging hammers on things, and it was just a ton of fun.
That's a great theme.
Yeah, he's really into it right now. Wherever we go, it's when we'll see a truck passing on the road. So it's, whoa, big truck, big truck. It's like my wife and I's favorite thing now. We always, wherever
My 17-year-old does the same thing. So.
Big truck, big truck. Well, awesome. Dustin, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I think you really brought some great insights, and I think it's just a really cool marketing type that, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't think about, but especially e-commerce. So really neat to kind of get that out there, and it's a different channel to chase down and find some new ways to drive some volume. So thank you so much. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andy. Lindsey, this has been a lot of fun. One thing I do, just as a closing thought, if an e-com brand owner is listening to this and like, sounds like a good idea, and they make a note, they want to look at it in the future, don't treat it like waiting for someone to invite you, or even like if you do outreach and you've got some people in mind you want to be on their show, don't do this once or twice and it'd be like, it was fine, or I didn't get any results. This works really well when it's a system and when you do it consistently. So I promise you, if you get on 5 shows and you do it on a consistent basis, you'll start to unlock a lot of the power behind this that you won't see if you do it as like a one-off exercise. So, and the other thing I would say, if this is like intimidating, it sounds like a lot of work, a VA, an assistant on your team can do 90% of this work, where you really just get to show up, talk about yourself, talk about your brand, and have fun. That's my whole thing. Is I've done enough marketing stuff. I like to have fun when I do it. And it's a lot of fun if you're not like mired in the details and you're doing it consistently. So that's really what we do at Simple Success Coaching. So I want to make sure that I kind of brought that together, that like make it a system, make it an asset to your business, and do it consistently. And that's where you'll get a lot of these benefits.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again, and have a great week.
See you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.